Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Family Business, where I'm thrilled to introduce you to Amy Belt Raimundo. Amy and I go back a long time, and her story is beyond extraordinary, in my opinion. I think you'll agree once you hear it. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to spend some time together and reconnect in this way.
Absolutely. So the show is based on intertwining of career and family, and I thought you'd be the ideal person because of all that you do in addition to having your family. It's amazing what you juggle. And so if you could take a minute and just give some context of what you do today so people know a bit about you, and then we'll get into the fun stuff.
Sure. So today I am the managing director of Kaiser Permanente Ventures, which is the venture capital fund for Kaiser Permanente. I am also on the board and founder of Medtech Women, which is a nonprofit organization lifting up the voices of women in the medtech industry. And those are my sort of primary work duties these days. And then I also have a 5-year-old girl who is luckily in preschool right now.
What she's leaving out, everybody, is there's a slew of secondary and tertiary things that she does. I'll let those unfold as we're talking, but Amy doesn't sit still very well. So I noticed something that we've never talked about. You and I have a couple things in common. I was a president of my fraternity in college, and you're president of your sorority. And so I'm curious if you were similar to me, and that was kind of the beginning of you getting your act together as far as maturity, being responsible for other people, or were you more mature than me and you were already there? Because I grew tremendously because of that experience, but I'm curious what yours was like.
Yeah, and it's funny because I enjoyed that experience. I think I enjoyed that experience because the remarkable women that was just part of that group, who I am still close with and friends with today, and sort of in awe of the different things they have done personally and professionally. Yeah, I mean, I think, it was a labor of love because,
Yep.
Being sort of part of a peer group like that and being able to be sort of useful to them in the sense of just organizing the things we needed to organize, was really beneficial. I probably benefited the most from it all.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that, because that's what I say. I benefited from it because financially they made it free for that year and all these other kinds of things. I had a place to live and a place to eat for nothing, which my parents appreciated, and all that kind of thing. But it was more than maturity and responsibility. It was the first time I was responsible for another human being in my life, in a budget and following the law, which we rarely did, and all those kinds of things that I was supposed to. So let's explore that just one step further. So what you guys don't know is Amy also is a lacrosse champion. And so how did you manage your grades, manage running the sorority, manage playing at a high level of college athletics, and still have a life?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that I love having my hand in a lot of different things. So I do think that is probably, started very early in life. It showed up in college, as you're describing, and it shows up now, where it is almost like the portfolio approach I take with my venture capital career, where, I get excited about lots of different things and try to figure out how do you knit them all together. It's not, a lot of times it's not pretty. So like, it might look good on the outside if you're just looking at my LinkedIn page, but the reality of it is there's a lot of, near misses on handoffs. There's a lot of, I really wish I had done that better. But then also the learning and growing of like what must get done versus what would be nice to get done. But hey, that's just not possible if I want to get all these things, over the line.
Yeah, well, prioritization sounds great in theory until you have a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're ready to go, everything's packed up, and the kid has one in the oven. And so let's explore that for a second. So for someone like you who just has her life going in multiple directions, but somehow keeps it on the rails, which is amazing in its own right, and then you have your daughter, from the outside looking in, you seem so together, but I'm curious what goes on when you close the door at your house with her and with all of the boards that you're on and all the things that you do. What's really happening at that point?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say that if, like, I think that's what's actually been revealing about the pandemic and sort of the sort of Zoom world into people's houses that you now get, which you never got to see before, is that what's actually happening in the background may be I'm walking the dog while on a board call while picking up my daughter from preschool. And so like, you're sometimes you have to pick where can I multitask and where is that totally inappropriate. And then sometimes it's just, it was going to be good and then it doesn't happen.
Well, that's always a slippery slope. You've got two live things with you that the
Right.
dog doesn't do what you want it to do, and your kid rarely does what you want to do. So you're really rolling the dice at that point.
Yeah. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But I think just being comfortable with, sometimes it doesn't. Like sometimes they're just going to know that, your daughter is, like doing something ridiculous. And you're found out. But I do feel like that, in some ways the pandemic has created space for that because so many people are going through that so visibly that, people start focusing not on the sort of niceties, is it quiet in the space you're in, but did you get the thing done?
That's the truth. I think it humanizes us and to the point where you accept the fact that nothing is ever going to be perfect. And now you see why it's not perfect. It used to be you had to just accept it. Now you're like, oh, I get it. She's got 4 dogs running through behind her and kids chasing them with Cheese Whiz or whatever's happening. And like, I totally get it. Now, the other thought that I had was you have this daughter now who I'm sure looks up to you like most daughters do with their moms. But for you, it's a bit of a different situation in that you have had an extensive education at the highest level. You've been successful athletically, you've been successful business-wise, charitably, within the community, and what you're doing for women in medtech, which we'll get to in a minute, is by far, to me, the most impactful. And yet, how does it filter down to Emery? Like, she's only 5, so I don't know how much of it you even talked to her about. Do you think she notices any of this?
Well, I think the funny part that came out of her mouth that I was a little both surprised and proud of was that, she will often, pretend that she's one of her parents and say things, that are just, parroting back what they think people do. And so she was playing with her little pretend phone and she told me to wait a second and said, I'm on a board call, and then got back on. I was like, well, it's going to be super normalized to her that women are on boards, even though she doesn't know what a board is. It doesn't, like none of that actually filtered in, but that part, is just going to be normal to her. And I know that we're going through, sort of quite a transformation in that regard. And I think I'm excited that she started grounded in, men and women are on boards.
So how do you let her know if you're on a call that you don't want to say this to your kid, but you can't be interrupted? Maybe it's somebody's career or it's a massive decision worth millions and millions of dollars and you can't make her popcorn at that moment. Like, do you have some signal or do you have a code word with her or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I will oftentimes tell her before I get on a call that, hey, this is really important and, mom's got to, really focus. So let's avoid disruption. That doesn't always work because she was actually home with us during our annual meeting with the KP executives, and then we have outside investors, so executives from other health plans and health systems. And we were in a 14-day quarantine, and she decided that she needed to tell me while I was talking and presenting that the doorbell had rang. So at times it's like, mommy's got to talk. That means you can't. But, and again, that's where I think the sort of, culture that we're in right now, which I think is great, is that, everyone, it was a nice break, for everybody. It was kind of amusing. But then, she understood and she's pretty good. And I, definitely thank her when she cooperates to the fullest degree that a 5-year-old can cooperate. Cause this, she's getting used to it. And then honestly, sometimes you just give them the iPad.
Yeah.
And she.
We've all been there. I mean, there isn't one of us who hasn't. And it's you know what? They're fine. They're absolutely fine. And
I think she actually likens herself as a YouTube star.
Oh, is that right?
Because she's figured out that she doesn't need the code to record herself. And so I have hours of recordings of her asking her audience to like her channel and comment below.
What does she do? Does she sing? What does she do?
She sings, she dances, she just has a sort of a running commentary. The grandparents think it's fabulous.
I'm sure. We got to get her on the next episode because I love when the kids come in. They take over. It happens all the time. And I just say, all right, just go, man. Knock yourself out. So your board relationships and your board experience has been extraordinary, I think, for someone still so early in their career. And I mean, we've all been down this path of this conversation where getting on the boards, and it's a bit of a boys' club, and how hard it is to get through, whether you're female or male. Sometimes you can't get on when you're younger, and yet you've managed to do it. And I noticed something different about yours that I wanted to ask you about. So I see board observer all over your LinkedIn profile, and I'm like, that's something that I don't really know much about. So could you give me some insight to the difference between being a board observer versus being on the board?
Yeah, absolutely. So from an investor perspective, our fund, there's some funds that will make what we call passive investments, which is they don't take any sort of board role, but they're, getting sort of an equity stake in that company. Yeah, all of the funds I work for don't do that. They either, when they fund a company, they either take a board director role or a board observer role. And the relevance of the board observer is sometimes if you are not the lead investor in a round of financing, and there's only they want to keep a smaller number for all sorts of governance reasons, a smaller number of board members that can have the board vote. You might not take a board role because there's maybe one, but there may be 3 people coming into that round. You then can take you can get a board observer right, which means you participate in the board meetings, but you don't have a board vote.
Okay.
So it's a lot of a balance of sort of governance, but also participation. And that can also, a lot of times that happens with the strategic investors as well, because there may be a reason we wouldn't want a board vote. And that was true back in Vivian. Like at times we, wouldn't take a board voting role, but we want a board observer role to help both provide guidance to the company, but also from an information rights perspective.
And so how do you balance your time? Because I imagine some boards take more time than others. And so do you have a threshold? Like, look, I can only do 8 or 10 of these, and that's all I can squeeze in.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of the, fund management is making sure that you're not, you can deploy the capital that you have to deploy without spreading yourself too thin across too many boards. So I think that is always the balance. And it also informs like how much money you put to work in individual companies, because you could put a little money into a lot of companies, but then you're in that situation that you're describing, which is, you're just too thin to be helpful in either direction, either helping the company at all that you're invested in, or helpful in terms of understanding the state of the company so that you can continue to do the analysis you need to do for follow-on financing.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. Now, which was your first board seat? What's the first time you were on?
It was a GIA Medical. It was a women's health company. Recently, it was bought by Cooper.
Yep. Yeah, I was following that. And so how did that happen? Like, was it one of those things that you had to work and strain and struggle, or was it just one of those things that it just happened to work out for you?
Well, that was really, that comes from, the investor role. So when I moved from Advanced Technology Ventures, where I was playing a more junior role, and then joined Covidian's venture capital fund, I was taking a lead investor role. And so GIA was the first investment that I led with Covidian. And so that enabled me, because it was also an earlier stage company. So that was one of those examples where we would take a board director role because there was just, fewer people around the table. We wanted a bigger voice, in the direction of the company. So that was very much from the investors, the role I was taking as an investor.
Huh. Did it matter that it was a women's health company? Did that come into play at all for the type of people you brought onto the board?
I would say that, because I think early stages of venture capital, backed companies are often mostly filled with the investors, because it's very much figuring out sort of the investment that's required, the milestones for the next round of financing, and it's very sort of investor centric. You can and often add, or maybe have one original management on there as well, usually the CEO. But then you start to add independent directors, so folks that are industry experts into the board for whatever, sort of typically functional reasons that you're bringing additional voice on the board to give guidance to the company. And so that sometimes can be technical, sometimes that can be, like another CEO, maybe somebody that has sort of been there, done that. If you have a younger CEO that's sort of newer to the role, it could be a, regulatory expert, but if that's really important. And so you really have to think through, like, why are we adding another person to the board? And then look at their, sort of what their, what their background and expertise is. And so, and I think boards are added, primarily for that reason. Like, board members are added primarily for that reason on the independent. And then as a company matures and then is moving into later stages and then potentially into sort of the public stage, then it's, you go from an investor-based board to a sort of independent director board, dominated board.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a sensitive question, and you can tell me if I'm off base. I've always heard that there's a certain reciprocity that happens on board seats. You get me on yours, I'll get you on mine, and it may not be overt, but I am curious when someone is on the inside, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I am curious. I've always wondered this. Is that kind of what goes down, or is that really just a myth?
I think at least, and again, I think the dynamic that I've seen is that people do want people they know, and people they know and trust. And so it definitely comes out as clubby. And actually, is some of the reason that boards are not as diverse as they should be, is that it comes down to, like, who do I know and trust? Because they're going to make a board vote. They have a vote. And particularly if you're a venture capitalist and you're bringing independents, you're bringing them on for expertise, but you also don't know, they're going to vote on where this company goes in the future. And if it's misaligned with how you're thinking about it, that's meaningful. And so you end up with a sort of more of a clubbiness, because people want to know, do I trust this person's judgment? Do I know them? And you sort of take it from just what they look like on paper to, do I know them? And people's networks naturally tend to look more like themselves. And so I think that's why we've had this sort of proliferation of, boards don't look like America. They look like a certain set of folks who started with the capital.
Okay,
so,
I follow.
I think that, in a lot of ways, that's what goes on. And I think what I think is an excellent opportunity to be in a renaissance of that, because things are changing and people are needing to work to grow networks beyond what naturally occurs for them.
Well, it's gotten so easy to grow your network now. LinkedIn alone allows you to connect with people that you would have never met years ago.
Yeah.
And that's only 20 years ago. It's not like it's 100 years ago. All right, so we haven't really talked about him much, but I think the guy lurking in the background is your husband. And I don't mean physically, he's on behind you,
Yes.
but I mean, he's a brilliant guy in his own right. And I don't know really much about him at all. And I'm curious, how is it being married to you and all that goes on in your world? And this guy, I mean, he has his own career going. He's a PhD. And so I'd love to hear a bit about him.
Yeah, so I mean, we are, both in healthcare, broadly speaking. He is a drug discovery scientist, and he works for a startup. So we don't overlap in the sense of I don't invest in any therapeutics. And so there's not like a perfect overlap in terms of what we do, but, sort of adjacent. But we know, several of the same folks. But he is, a scientist and is sort of on the front lines of drug discovery. And so, it makes for, interesting dinner time conversations. I'm sure the 5-year-old's like, what are they talking about? But it is interesting because we are very much a sort of 50-50 household. And, I think, he at times is, has been dizzied by all of the things I've got going, but then he's got all the things going as well. And so we just really try to work hard on how do we sort of divide and conquer in a way that feels fair to both of us. And it is riding by the seat of our pants a lot of the time. So we're both running on a lot of adrenaline.
My wife and I are similar. We both sit on different boards in the community, and we were constantly running to and fro. We just had my son's, we lost in the last minute of the basketball semifinals last night. So in the middle of everything, I'm packing up my bag of basketballs and running to the courts. And
right.
And so we live that. But I think that's amazing that you, instead of finding somebody who's the opposite of you, you found somebody who's just as active and just as ambitious and just as together in their own right. And I think it makes for just a unique household. Now, do you speak English or Portuguese at home?
In English. Neither of us speak Portuguese.
Oh, he doesn't speak Portuguese at all?
No, that's his father's first language, but he never spoken it at home.
Oh, that's really funny. I assume that he did. That happens a lot down here where I live in Miami, where you think kids all know Spanish and half of them are like, I don't know any.
I know. No, both of us are shamefully one language. I think he went to Spanish camp.
Is there such a thing?
I took like 6 years of Spanish, but I'm not good.
That's funny. So the decisions that you've made in your career, how many times has it been where you had to stop and go, I'm about to get married, or I'm about to have a baby, or I have a child, or my husband's career is going in a different direction. I can't make this change, or I need to make a change because we're physically moving, or whatever the impetus is. But I'm curious, from someone who made a lot of career choices on her own to now you have other people in the mix, what has that been like? And if you have an example or two of like, hey, look, I had to really decide here on what to do because of Emory or because of just my rest of my life besides just me.
Right. Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I think physical geography has been very dominant in the thought process. And, I live in San Francisco. I've lived here since '98. So, and off and on in different, sort of temporary situations in other places. But, I think, trying to move both of us in careers like that, I think would really be a struggle. And so I think oftentimes when opportunities to live somewhere else really aren't sort of part of the equation. Now, strategically, we are both in a location that is sort of target rich. And so I think that was also, sort of part of the thinking is locate yourself in a place where you're not limited to, sort of one option where, the majority of what's happening in your industry is happening because that will ultimately be, a constraint. And actually both Brian and I both went to Berkeley for graduate school. And he's been here since '91. So I think, we're pretty entrenched. Now, what's interesting about this environment is that, suddenly sort of geographic barriers feel less important than they've ever felt.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an interesting dynamic that I think will sort of change work going forward. But that was very much top of mind for the two of us, as we thought about our careers.
Yeah, you've managed to maintain your momentum, and as tough as Emory is, she hasn't slowed you down. And as they get older,
I'm grayer now.
Yeah, tell me about it. As they get older, it's funny, they become more independent and more dependent at the same time with different things. And you'll see as she gets older, she'll get harder and easier until she turns 16 and can drive herself places. And you're like, listen, I'm done. My work here is complete. Go have fun. I want to make sure that we explore the medtech women. I think that is something that I've just been admiring from a distance. My wife is executive. My sister's an executive. My mom's worked her whole life. I only assume my daughter is in the same trajectory. And I want to get without getting too cliche, but I want to find out how you started all of it and give me an idea of where it is today, because I don't think people understand where that has grown to, especially with San Francisco being, I guess, the medical device capital of the world, in my opinion. So could you give me just a minute or two on how it all started and where it all is today?
Yeah, it's interesting. It started, I mean, really back in 2009. And at that time, the financial crisis was sort of in full swing. I was in venture capital at that point in my first role. And what I was seeing was troubling, which is I thought we were sort of, in my career, we were just on a trajectory where more and more women were going to take leadership roles. And we were just, it was just the march, forward for history. And that was the first time I really saw people receding from roles and receding from visibility at the expert level for women. And I think I had been just to, I think 2 conferences in a row where, women weren't on the podium, where they were very, very, very little representation. And, I came from Guidant on the Medtech side, where a ton of really powerful
That's just what I wrote down, Amy. That's literally just what I wrote down. So take it from there, because I love Guidant was so prolific that way.
So prolific, and so many female leaders, continue on from there. And so I knew that those leaders were out there and those experts were out there, but I was not seeing them. And I felt like that was both a missed opportunity and also damaging both to women and to men, of that sort of perception that women weren't experts. And so you just can't see, so I started to think, like, what do I do about it? Like, complaining about things is not really my MO. I find that frustrating and draining, but doing something about something actually feels invigorating and inspiring. And so I just started thinking through, like, what do I want to do? And what I didn't want to do was, start complaining to people that hold conferences about what they should be doing differently. And so I thought, hey, why don't we just start holding our own conference? Because we know all these experts. Let's make the opportunity to hear from them and lift their voices up. And I, texted, now CEO of Evidation, Deb Kilpatrick.
Yep. She's a good one to start with.
That's a good one to start with. She was at CardioDX at the time in a board meeting. And I said, hey, this is what I think we should do. And her, one, sentence return was, I'm in.
Yeah, she's the real deal.
She is the real deal. And so, we, in a lot of ways got sort of the band back together. There's a lot of, because Guidant had been bought by the combination of Boston Scientific and Abbott at that point. And so we sort of got the band back together on the sort of Guidant leaders, and then some additional, wonderful leaders that we've met through our different career journeys, and put a forming team together, and really and focused on where the power of the voices that weren't being heard was. And so we were really focused on the content and the expertise of those women, as opposed to the fact that we were women. It was, we are giving voice to this set of talent and this set of expertise that is just doesn't have a venue for it. And we would all be better for it. And so, that is really, it was, it felt risky and revolutionary at the time. This was,
it was.
It kind of was. I mean, it kind of was an era where you sort of pretended you weren't a woman, which, of course, is silly because everyone knows you are. It's hard to hide.
No, but you had to play the game. I know what you're saying.
And really just transforming and say, no, like, I'm going to step forward and say, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And really,
that's well said. Okay.
It really, because for me, it was an untapped opportunity. And I still feel that way in terms of, if people aren't getting sort of the credit for their capability, it's sort of an advantage for me to be able to get to know them and to create a network among these very powerful, talented people. that I sort of happen to therefore have an in with because I've created opportunities for them.
All right,
and so that is really how we've thought about it, is how can we create opportunities to grow and advance the careers of other women?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything that I do. You know, it's interesting. I looked at my stats, which I normally don't do, and I wrote something about this in LinkedIn. 60% of my hiring executives are women. 60% of my placements are women. And I never really thought it was intentional. I just kind of the way I work. And it's been a pleasure knowing that without even thinking about it, that's what was happening. And our industry was definitely transforming. Now, I'd like to give a little credit. Who else besides you and Deb helped build this?
Oh, I mean, the list is long.
I'll bet.
But Amanda De Palma is a critical leader from the beginning until today. She is a huge role in that. Susan Stimson, Tamara Elias, Jen Beaton, Virginia Giddings. Jessica Richter came in and is now taking a huge leadership role. I mean, the list goes on. Bridget Hurley, did I say that already?
No.
The list goes on. Nicole Osmer. I mean, it is, Katie Arnold. I mean, it is an extensive list of people that really dug in. I mean, I think that was what was the hallmark of this. It was a group of women who really rolled up their sleeves. And, one thing we're actually now trying to correct for, because we're all doing, I mean, the nice thing is these were all people that raised their hand to say, I want to do more. And, I think that also is a hallmark of people that will do more and continue to, advance in their careers themselves. And they all have. And so now it's a question of like, how do we support those people? So we actually just hired an executive director. It was our first executive director. And is somebody that has been working with the program for a long time. But, that again is sort of a hallmark of the need for this and the desire and thirst for this kind of thing has actually continued to grow. Like in some ways, I actually was interviewed early on and they asked the question, what do you want to see in 10 years? And I said, I want to see that we're not needed anymore.
Yep.
But, and actually in some ways it's sad because we're in the other position, which is we're needed more than ever. But I also think it's great because there is an awareness and a drive that I think is very authentic for, really tapping in and to all the talent that's out there.
Now, what about, and I hope I'm not poking a hole in something that you guys haven't gotten to yet, what about women in college or in high school? Like, where does it start for you guys?
Yeah, it's interesting because that's an area that I've been, we have done some really, like some starting in that category, because we have done a couple different donations to Girls Inc., which is an organization I've been part of, which again is starting from go, so, because I think the realization that, if we are affected by the way that, women are showing up in our industry as adult grown women who, in a lot of respects have had a lot of advantages. The magnitude of the effect for young women who may have even less exposure to this part of the professional world is just magnified. And so, what can we do to sort of reach to those girls? There's so much opportunity that we just have not even tapped far enough. But even during the pandemic, I did sort of a call out to, the Medtech women leadership to say like, these girls don't have laptops. And so, I got sort of an actual, like an order of like, how many do you need to get to these girls? And the Medtech women showed up and just sent them, we sent them a check so they could buy all the laptops they needed for their, set of girls in Alameda County. And so it's that sort of like, you just see something that is, you see yourself reflected in, a younger girl and wanting to make sure that, they get the advantages and opportunity that, I've benefited from.
Well, that to me seems like it has social media written all over it. Instagram for these kids, because my daughter scrolls Instagram regularly and she's 17. and these girls are, let's just say they're into it. And that's just the easiest way to reach them because they're on it. And a lot of the girls her age are pretty empowered. It's really amazing that it has filtered down some of it. Some of these girls, because their moms work or they're surrounded by women who are well educated and successful in their own right. And it seems like it's getting there to the point where they're aware of it. But I think you're right. There's a large population. Maybe it's more rural. Maybe it's more inner city that maybe they're just not seeing this. And social media would be a great avenue, like almost TED Talks of some kind with different members of your team, because you guys are also articulate, also engaging, also personable. You're all a bit of a trip. You know, the ones that I know. I mean, Katie Arnold and I go back a long time.
We have a member of a newer member of the Medtech Women team that has kicked off a podcast.
Oh, great.
Medtech Stories. So subscribe to that.
Perfect. Who is it?
Vishali. She is a new member.
Oh, yeah. I know her.
Excellent.
Exactly. Great. Absolutely. So I never got a chance to ask someone this, and I've always wanted to know. I know it sounds far from what we've talked about, but when you're a former college athlete, what is it like when you graduate and there's no weight training regimen, there's no running regimen, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm not playing lacrosse anymore? What do you do? Do you have to form your own program? Do you join a club team? Like, what do you do to just scratch that itch?
Yeah, so it's been a lot of years since those years. The interesting thing is when I left college, I almost went cold turkey, like to nothing. Like,
wow.
Occasionally running, because I just was, I mean, frankly, I was just working all the time.
Yeah.
And that was, I just thought in my mind that like adults don't join teams or adults don't do this. And my dad was a runner and played tennis. So I had some touch point of like, oh, maybe it doesn't have to end entirely, but it's funny, like it shut down. But then about, I would say, 3 years into doing nothing, I just couldn't do that anymore. Yeah. So, I've tried a lot of different sports. I've, been part of an ultimate Frisbee club. I've been part of, a soccer club. I am now, I've run a bunch of half marathons, and now I'm actually doing a lot of CrossFit. So I'm part of that. Whatever you say about that. But that for me scratches that itch.
Now, does Emery have a lacrosse stick already in her room?
She doesn't have a lacrosse stick, but she actually thinks she's a CrossFit coach. So because when she was born, it was the thing, like when I did CrossFit all throughout my pregnancy, like until like 3 days before she was born.
Yeah, that sounds like you.
Modified.
Yeah.
And then she would come to the gym with us because the owners were awesome, and we could just stroll her in and sort of park her, because when they're little, you can just park them. And so she has grown up in the gym. And so she knows all the words, she knows all the things, she does squat, she comes up with her own programming. So it's pretty funny.
Does she have your athletic genes? Are you seeing any of it yet?
She definitely loves being physical.
Yeah.
She loves running, she loves being active, she never stops moving. So I think actually, she probably gets that from both her parents. Like that's always been the case. So, we'll see, how that actually translates into something, but, we're just trying to expose her to everything and see what she likes.
Awesome. Well, look, this has been every bit as good as I thought. You are beyond informative. Is there anything I missed? Is there anything that I should know about you or your family that we haven't covered?
Well, I think the only thing I would add to the sort of from the beginning of our conversation around the board is that we're, for Medtech Women, we're actually kicking off a whole nother work stream of being able to bring women onto boards. And so Susan Simpson and Nancy Lynch are leading the charge for us in that. And we just think it's such a good opportunity in this day and age to both identify women that are interested in board service, and then do what we can to both connect them to opportunities and get them ready for opportunities. So I think it's a really good opportunity, again, to continue to advance, the women's expertise to the benefit of everybody.
Yeah, I think it's all about visibility and communication. You let people know, like, do you know Mika Nishimura?
Yeah.
So Mika just got on a board. I think it's her first. And it was just, I saw it all over LinkedIn and I was trying to spread it everywhere because I think that's what it begets more success is everyone needs to know when that happens. And someone else is sitting there going, yeah, I'll do it too. And that's literally how it occurs. So I've known Susan since she was Susan Bielecki. And so I'll be happy to help with anything we can do. I mean, we obviously have a platform here. So it'll be my pleasure. So this has been Amy Belt Raimundo on The Family Business, where family's what binds us. Amy, thanks so much for being here. You were fantastic.
Great, Matt. Great to spend time with you.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
See you.